It's time for another mailbag, and the question that every Notre Dame fan seems to be asking is, what are they going to do about the offensive coordinator? That's coming up next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? Welcome to Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Thursday, November 9th, and I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer covering college football for Fox Sports. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Since Notre Dame is on a bye week, there's obviously not a game to preview, but we've still got you covered with plenty of content on the podcast throughout the week. My post-game reaction show went up on Sunday. Then Luke Smith and I covered everything we liked and didn't like from the Clemson game on Tuesday's show. Obviously, that one was a little bit one-sided on the things we didn't like. But then I had Tyler James from Inside ND Sports on Wednesday's show to talk about how the Irish can try and salvage this season with a strong finish. We even started to look ahead to the offseason a bit as well. So go check those out once you're done here if you haven't already. And now let's get to the mailbag questions. And I got to say, you guys have a lot more questions when things are going poorly for Notre Dame than when things are going pretty smooth, because I had a lot to choose from this week, and I lumped a few together for this first part because they all involve the offensive coordinator. So BS Cherry 83 asks, favorite candidates for a new offensive coordinator? And at Nathan_Coleman45 says, are there any potential offensive coordinator candidates you would want if Notre Dame moved on from Parker? So at least Nathan Coleman here threw in the caveat that if Notre Dame were to move on from Gerad Parker, whereas BS Cherry 83 was like, what's done is done, who's coming in next? Well, right now, Gerad Parker is the offensive coordinator for Notre Dame, and until we hear otherwise, we're going to have to operate as if he's the offensive coordinator for next season as well. And I know how the fan base feels about it, and I have my own opinions about what Notre Dame should do at offensive coordinator as well, but I'm not going to go on this podcast and say that a guy needs to be fired or a coach needs to be fired, because I think things have to get really, really bad for me to say that. Because, look, I'm not going to pretend like I know everything that's going on inside the Goog right now when it comes to the offense. If it's all Gerad Parker's fault, if there's more to it, I think that we can just look at the product on the field and we can all admit it's been really disappointing on offense. But I don't know. I'm just not going to be the guy who says he should be fired. It feels weird for me to do that. Gerad Parker has a family and all that. But if Marcus Freeman decides to do that, I can't really disagree with him. Let's put it that way. So I will say I'm not 100% certain that Freeman is going to fire Parker. I'm not even really close to 100%, because there is a possibility that Notre Dame finishes this season 9-3 with a top 15 offense nationally in terms of points per game and yards per play. Right now, they're averaging 6.81 yards per play, which is 13th in the country, and they're also scoring an average of 36.8 points per game, which is 15th nationally, and that's actually tied for 6th in school history, according to Pete Sampson from The Athletic. Now, obviously, the stats don't tell the whole story. I'm not trying to convince you that Notre Dame should keep Gerad Parker, but I'm just pointing out that the facts are facts, and that's something that Marcus Freeman might consider. I'd also like to point out, though, that context is everything, and that Notre Dame's scoring average drops to 24.6 points per game against teams with defenses ranked in the top 50 in scoring defense. That includes NC State, Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, and Clemson. Notre Dame has scored an average of 40.6 points per game against teams with scoring defenses ranked outside the top 50. So that's a pretty significant margin. And obviously, when you're playing against the best defense, or at least the better defenses in the country, because I don't look at a defense ranked in like the 40 through 50 or even 30 through 50, which is where NC State falls. I don't look at that group as an elite defense. Notre Dame has the talent to put up points on that group. So Notre Dame is averaging a lot less points per game against good defenses compared to bad defenses, and most notably in all of this is that Notre Dame is averaging just 19 points per game on offense in their 3 losses. And also, when I did the points per game stats, that's only offensive points. So I'm not including like a Jadarian Price kickoff return, Chris Tyree punt return, or any of that, any defensive touchdown either. I'm strictly looking at points that the offense put up. Okay, and you could make the case that that number should even be lower, considering the times against USC when Xavier Watts would either recover a fumble or get an interception and bring the ball back to the 2-yard line, and then the offense gets the points, because that was the case in the Clemson game, and the offense gets credit for that touchdown. But if you look at it, Notre Dame actually, that number could be as low as 16.67 points per game in their losses if Watts had been able to get those extra 2 yards himself, and that's just unacceptable. That tells you that in all of Notre Dame's losses, the offense is not doing enough to put them in a position to win the game. I don't really know how you would debate that. So I know that the numbers are what they are when you look at all the games in totality. But when Notre Dame's losing, they're playing against a pretty good defense, and it's because their offense is not putting up points. I would say that even though the defense has had their lapses this season, they have played winning football in every single game. Sure, they've had some bad drives. The 3rd-19 play against Ohio State, 10 men on the field. You already know that. I already know that. But still, if you look at each individual game, Notre Dame's defense has done enough to win in every single game. And frankly, the offense has not done the same. It's even worse when you consider the talent that Notre Dame has on the offensive side of the ball. And clearly, there are deficiencies. We've talked about the wide receiver position a lot on this podcast. They have not lived up to expectations this season. They have been very disappointing. Granted, they've dealt with some injuries, specifically to Jane Thomas, Deion Colsey, Matt Salerno. So Chancey Stuckey and his group have had a difficult hand to play with so far this season, but still, their production is not enough. And part of that goes back to what they weren't able to land in the transfer portal this offseason. And then they've got a guy like Sam Hartman, who I understand has not played well recently, specifically against Clemson, but still, we know what he's capable of. We know what he did at Wake Forest, and we saw him have a lot of success at Notre Dame so far this season. So when you have a quarterback who's that experienced, who's that talented, you have one of the best running backs in the country in Wojciak Esme, and a loaded room behind him in terms of young, talented guys, and a pretty good offensive line for the most part, including a first-round pick at left tackle. What the offensive has done this season has been unacceptable. I don't think there's any debating that at this point in time, despite the fact that their points per game and yards per play numbers are a little bit higher nationally. I think it's just too skewed to the fact that Notre Dame played teams like Navy, Central Michigan, Tennessee State, and were able to put up a bunch of points on them, even Pittsburgh, for example. But they're one of the worst teams in the Power 5 right now. So Marcus Freeman has a decision to make, clearly. What is he going to do with Gerad Parker? Is he going to retain him, or is he going to fire him and try to hire an outside coordinator or an offensive coordinator from the outside? That actually brings me to my next question from ND Football Enjoyer, love that name, who asks, seems to me that just about everyone who covers Notre Dame knows what change needs to be made and is confident that it will in fact happen. At what point does Marcus Freeman rip the Band-Aid off? Do you think he's going to use the bye week to evaluate potential OC targets? So even though I just said I don't know if Marcus Freeman is going to end up firing Gerad Parker, if he's going to want to move in a different direction, I would say that if he does decide to fire him, I think it has to be immediately after the Stanford game. I don't think you can afford to wait until after the bowl game because the transfer portal opens on December 4th. Notre Dame wants to get a transfer quarterback. So how can you convince a transfer to come to Notre Dame when the offensive coordinator on staff isn't going to be around next season? I understand that Marcus Freeman would be leading the charge recruiting him, but that quarterback is going to want to know what type of offense he's going to be playing in. When Sam Hartman committed to Notre Dame, Tommy Rees was still the offensive coordinator. Obviously, things changed, and there's different timelines for all these hires. But I think if you plan on getting rid of him, you just got to get it over with, okay? And if Notre Dame were to fire him after the Stanford game, odds are Marcus Freeman is already thinking about it. So I do think that he's going to use the bye week to evaluate his future offensive coordinator, and also what does he want his offense to look like? Because that's been a big question that's come up from time to time because Freeman has been on record saying that he wants an offensive and defensive line-driven program, which I totally understand and support. Games are often won in the trenches, but at the same time, this is modern college football. Look at all the best offenses in the country right now. They can pass the ball downfield. They have an effective running game. They have skilled players on the outside. And frankly, for as long as Marcus Freeman has been the coach, that has not been the case. Now, a lot of that has to do with the players that he inherited, but I'm curious to see if he reevaluates his offensive philosophy going forward and how that affects his offensive coordinator hire. But Freeman has a lot to do during the bye week, and Tyler James and I talked about that on the show earlier this week. His number one priority, in my opinion, has to be figuring out whatever needs to be done to win out because Notre Dame cannot finish 8-4 or anything worse than that. That would be really embarrassing. And then we're talking about, is Marcus Freeman the guy? We have a lot bigger picture questions to handle then. But if Notre Dame does finish 9-3, if they win their bowl game, they get that 10th win, things are a little bit better. I'm not saying that changes what you do with the offensive coordinator, but that should be priority number one for Marcus Freeman. Like, try to stay the course here. through the close of the season. You owe it to your seniors, you owe it to your veterans, and you owe it to your fans to try to win every single game left on the schedule. Marcus Freeman also has some recruiting stuff to deal with. Early signing period is just over a month away. He has to make sure that all of the recruits who are committed in this class are locked in. And if you're going to try to flip anyone at the last second, check in on them as well. But that is also a big priority because you can't afford to neglect them and then risk losing a commitment here right as you're entering the home stretch. And then he obviously has to figure out some self-scouting things and figure out what you want to do with Gerad Parker and other coaches on the staff going forward. It's also a good time to look at your roster and think about which positions need to be helped out via the transfer portal. All of that stuff is going on right now. And it probably started during the bye week just a few weeks ago, but now it's really a bigger priority now that we're just 2 games away from the regular season ending and you're just full speed ahead into the offseason, because college football is so weird in that it is the shortest season and it is the longest offseason. And when the regular season ends, it's one of the busiest times on the college football calendar because the portal opens up, recruits are signing, and the coaching carousel is in full swing. So Marcus Freeman has to get ahead of that during this bye week by evaluating all of those things right now. And look, man, that's a very difficult job, but that's why you get paid millions of dollars to do it. So he's got a lot to figure out right now, but I'm confident that he's going to be able to do it. And this bye week is definitely beneficial in getting ready to prepare for all of that's coming his way here in just a few weeks. But we've got a lot more to get to. And coming up next, I'll tell you the biggest change Notre Dame needs to make in order to elevate the football program to what the fans want it to be. Today's episode is sponsored by Chase Medical. I spend a lot of time talking with you about wins, losses, who starts, and who sits. I'm thankful for that connection, but today I want to talk about something a little more personal. Whether you're on extended travel, bracing for a major weather event, or limited by yet another supply shortage, Chase Medical has you covered. Chase Medical provides life-saving antibiotics and a long list of daily medications that can be ordered in a 1-year supply, even ED generics for Cialis, Viagra, and Revatio prescriptions. Go online right now at chasemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply of your daily medication. Remember to use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. A verified customer had this to say about Chase. Quote, "I'm so thankful for this service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut bills in half to have it, so I ordered most of my daily meds with the year supply. I also ordered an antibiotic kit, and I finally feel secure. Prices are lower than local pharmacies, and I highly recommend this for everyone." End quote. If you or someone you love would get some peace of mind by having a year supply of any daily medication, go to chasemedical.com to see if it's offered for you. Remember to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. Before we continue, this is your reminder to please like the video below by hitting that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe there as well. If you're feeling extra generous today, you can rate the show 5 stars and leave a review. All right, let's get back to our questions. And this next one isn't really a question so much as it is a series of observations and theories by our guy, Voluntary Joel 41, who says, "Love the pod and the guests you've had on, including Luke Smith. Conspiracy theory: Parker schemed tight ends better over wide receivers because he's the position coach. Hot take: this season is not a failure. Most pundits had Notre Dame as a 2 to 3 loss team anyway. It's only a disappointing season." Okay, so first off, I appreciate the kind words, Joel, and I appreciate you submitting this question or whatever you want to call it, because you're a regular mailbag contributor, and I really do appreciate it. I will say I disagree with your conspiracy because being the offensive coordinator pays a hell of a lot more than being the tight ends coach, and it's more important to the success of the team. So I think showing favoritism to your group at the expense of the offense is going to cost you in the long run. So I don't really think that was the play by Gerad Parker. I think it had more to do with the fact that Notre Dame's wide receivers have not been very good at all this season. And Mitchell Evans, the tight end, was really the only playmaker when it came to catching the ball outside of Chris Tyree in some spots. And really, Parker had no choice but to scheme up the tight ends because Evans was the only one making plays. I do appreciate your point about this season not being a failure and it being more of a disappointing season. I see that. I understand your point there. I think part of what makes it a failure is that Notre Dame was able to add the best quarterback via the transfer portal this offseason. And again, I know we struggled recently, but Sam Hartman was an obvious take for Notre Dame. And even though we struggled, I don't think that's on him as much as it is on the play caller. Sure, Hartman underperformed in this last game against Clemson. He did not play well at all. That wasn't entirely Parker's fault, and he really looked shaky at times in that Louisville game. But overall, I think you just look at what Hartman has been able to do, and in those moments, you're like, man, this is a really good quarterback. I just think he's lost confidence, and he doesn't really have great receivers to throw to right now. So I think in that aspect, It's really disappointing that Notre Dame wasn't able to maximize his ability, and it definitely hurts the credibility in terms of Notre Dame's development of quarterbacks. We know that's been the stigma around the program for a really long time that predated Marcus Freeman, and after a season like this, it doesn't really help Notre Dame's cause. I will also say that going into the season, Notre Dame was projected to lose 2 to 3 games. Part of that has to do with the fact that I think people thought Notre Dame's schedule would be more difficult than it ended up being. Ohio State is still a really good team, but they were certainly gettable. Notre Dame could have absolutely won that game. Duke was probably better than people thought they'd be when Notre Dame played them, but then you look at what they've done after Riley Leonard went out, and they've been struggling a lot. So I don't know how to evaluate that game, really. Louisville was better than expectations, I would say, even though I thought they'd be undefeated when Notre Dame played them. They have a good chance at winning the ACC championship if they're able to win out here and knock off Florida State in that championship game. And then Clemson has been disappointing. So I think when you look at the schedule overall, it really wasn't the gauntlet that we thought it was going to be. It was still a difficult schedule, don't get me wrong, but at the time, and I haven't even mentioned USC, who's been a colossal disappointment so far this season. So I think when you look at the schedule as a whole, it just wasn't as tough, and I think that Notre Dame has too much talent to not only lose 3 games, but to lose in the way that they have and see what Notre Dame has done on offense, because going into this season, you're thinking, all right, well, Notre Dame will figure out the defense, but at least you can count on the offense being able to put up points, and that has not been the case at all. So that's why I think it's been a bit of a failure. But, hey, if Notre Dame wins out, maybe if they beat LSU in the bowl game, we could be talking about the season much differently at the end of the year. All right, I think we covered it there. Let's go on to our next one from at MDC Web TV. What is the biggest change or need that will get Notre Dame football to get to the fans' level of expectations? This is a difficult question to answer because I think that there is a large portion of the Notre Dame fan base with unrealistic expectations. Like, I don't believe Notre Dame is ever going to be like Alabama or Georgia in competing for a national championship every year. I know that there are some people who listen to this podcast who disagree with me on that. They saw what Notre Dame was able to do during the Holtz era, where every year they were competing at the top of college football, but they did only win 1 national championship. And if you want to take it back to like the Leahy days when Notre Dame won 4 national championships in the 1940s, I don't think we're getting back to that point in the modern era of college football. Now, Notre Dame should definitely improve. I think the floor for any Notre Dame team going forward should be at least 9 wins every season. That is the floor, and that's what Notre Dame is facing so far this season. But they can definitely be better than that. I think once the playoff expands to 12 teams, the expectation for every season going forward is that Notre Dame should be at least competing for the college football playoff. But if you're looking at it for one season, like what does Notre Dame need that is going to get them over the top? They need a generational quarterback talent. And I know that's easier said than done. Those guys don't grow on trees, and sometimes you could have the quarterback, but when everything else goes to shit, then you're still not going to be that good of a team. Look no further than our counterparts, our rivals on the West Coast out here in LA and USC. They've got an unbelievable quarterback and no one else really on defense to help them out. So it's not the only thing, but I think Notre Dame has shown that they can get most everything else outside of like elite skill players on offense. But like Notre Dame's defense has been really good this season. If they were to have like Trevor Lawrence, let's say. I think we're talking about this season much differently because even though I was really high on Sam Hartman going into the season, no one ever thought he was like a Trevor Lawrence level or a CJ Stroud or guys like that who are really not just elite college football players, but are going to go top 10 overall in the NFL draft. Like Notre Dame hasn't had a quarterback like that in a really long time. If they did have a quarterback like that in 2020 or 2018, they very well could have won the semifinal game. Although I guess those are 2 kind of bad examples because 2018 Clemson and 2020 Alabama were 2 like generationally talented teams. But you get my point. They really need a quarterback to carry them over the top. But if we're talking like big picture changes, I would just say that Notre Dame and the leaders of the university and the football program, like they all need to be on the same page about providing what is necessary to build an elite roster and a staff that can compete at the top of college football right now. Notre Dame already has a new athletic director, and hey, I like Jack Swarbrick. I thought he was really good at his job, but I have really high hopes for Pete Bavacqua because I think he's a really talented businessman and administrator, but most of all, that man is a Notre Dame fan. He went to the university. He loves the football program. He wants them to succeed. So I think that he's going to be very willing to do whatever it takes to give them the resources they need to succeed. Now, obviously, in order to do that, you need to get the finances, and Pete Bavacqua is going to have to fundraise with some people, let's just say some trustee members, things like that, who maybe don't have the same affinity or affection for the football program, but Notre Dame is going to need their money to give the program what they need in order to have success. So it starts with him, the athletic director, and then it goes all the way to the top because Notre Dame is going to have a new president here pretty soon because Father John Jenkins is set to retire. So what does the next president think about the football program and its importance to the university? We're going to have to wait and see, but whoever that person is, they're all going to have to be on the same page between the president, the board, the athletic director, and the head coach. They all have to be, in sync here and doing what is necessary to get the football program to where they need to be. All right, last question before the break here. Who is better talent at the moment, CJ Carr or Deuce Knight? Who do you think will have the better career at Notre Dame? This one is really hard to say because CJ Carr is a year older than Deuce Knight. He's more physically developed than Deuce. He's played more football. Deuce Knight is just a junior. He's in the class of 2025. If you were to look at the recruiting rankings, CJ is ranked a little bit higher in his class according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. He's incredibly accurate. I thought he performed pretty well at the Elite 11 based on what I heard and some people that we talked to on the podcast over the summer. And with Deuce, I think he's probably a better raw athlete, and he has more arm strength. He's a little bit taller too. He's 6'5". I think CJ is only 6'2.5", maybe close to 6'3". Maybe he'll grow a little bit, but I think you could make a compelling argument that Deuce might have more raw talent down the line. But I think as a pure quarterback and polished passer, it's probably CJ Carr right now. So as for who's going to have the better career, I think I'm going to take CJ Carr because he's likely going to have a better opportunity. Like Notre Dame is probably going to take a transfer quarterback for the 2024 season, so CJ is likely going to sit behind him. But then in the following season, 2025, is CJ going to be ready to start? And we'll see what happens with Kenny Minchey and Steve Angeli. The fact that Notre Dame is so fixated on getting a transfer quarterback this offseason makes me think that they aren't believers in Steve Angeli, and I know his stats. I know how he's looked in garbage time, but I think that's pretty telling that the staff is like, hey, we need to go out there and get someone. I don't think that impacts Kenny Minchey as much in terms of what they think about him. I just think he's still very young and he's still very green, and that maybe they think that he can be the guy down the line, but clearly as he enters what would be his redshirt freshman season, they think he's not ready and needs to gain more experience playing in the system and things like that. So I think that CJ is going to be really good for Notre Dame. Now, who really knows with these top quarterbacks? You've heard me say it time and time again, 50% of these guys end up being busts. So even though I think CJ is going to be really good, I have no way of knowing. So the fact that Notre Dame was able to get Minchey, Carr, and then Deuce Knight in 3 consecutive recruiting classes is a great sign, because even if one guy busts, you got to imagine that one of those 3 is going to end up being really good at the college level, and hopefully Notre Dame is able to keep that one and develop him, because I think the future is bright at the quarterback position based on how Notre Dame has been recruiting. So it's really hard to predict these things, but I'm going to take CJ Carr for the time being until we see a little bit more from Deuce Knight and what he's able to do at the high school level. All right. We got a few more questions left, and it's time to talk some hoops. It's coming up right after this. This episode of Locked On Irish is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. You've heard me talk about Prize Picks before. I've had so much fun playing it during the football season, and now you can play during basketball season as well. You just select 2 or more players, pick more or less than their projected stats, and place your entry. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So for football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, and that's just one of the reasons why I think it's the best daily fantasy sports games out there. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege, code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Okay, our next question comes from @GFoley424. What's the number one thing you're excited about for next season? I appreciate the question, G. Foley, but I think it's a little bit too early to tell, honestly. I'm going to try and enjoy what we have left of this season. I know it's been a little bit disappointing, but I still love watching the Irish on Saturdays. And even though last week Was not the most fun game of all time. I'm going to miss watching Notre Dame on Saturday. Like when Notre Dame has a bye on November 11th, that's going to feel really weird. And I'm going to miss it. I'm going to miss that, pit in my stomach that I feel watching Notre Dame's offense just grind out 2 yards at a time. But I really do love watching the Irish, and I just want to savor these games because, as I was just saying earlier in the pod, like college football, the season is so short and the offseason is so long, and some of the stuff in the offseason, like conference realignment, NIL, and the demise of college football, like all of that conversation and all that offseason content, just like it's just not nearly as fun for me as just watching games and talking about them and reacting to them with you guys. So before we move on to next season, I'm going to finish out this season and try to enjoy every second of it because even if Notre Dame's struggling, I still just love the sport, and I'm just going to enjoy every second while I can. Okay, next question from Ricardo Caliente. Which coach is here longer, Marcus Freeman or the god Micah Shrewsbury? Okay, I think it's going to be Micah Shrewsbury. First of all, he's got a 7-year deal. Okay, so he's under contract for longer than Marcus Freeman. And I think for Shrewsbury, this is a destination job for him, and he's in it for the long haul. He's an Indiana guy. He's got a great job at Indiana. I think he really does love Notre Dame and the university and everything that it offers. And that's not to say that Marcus Freeman doesn't, but I think that Shrewsbury came to Notre Dame, is putting his foot in, like he's building roots here, and he wants to be here for a really long time. He also understands the uphill battle that he's facing right now because the program is really down in terms of the talent on the roster. They're extremely young. They're one of the youngest teams in all of college basketball. But I think that he's embracing the challenge and he wants to be around for a long time. And I think that after a few years, it might even take 3 seasons, honestly, before things are really cooking. But I think once that happens, he's going to have the program right where he wants to be. I think he's comfortable in Indiana. And I think that for a guy like him, he's not going to be looking to bolt at other jobs. I mean, I could be wrong. Like maybe one day Indiana comes calling and he wants to go there and be the head coach of the Hoosiers. That could happen. I don't know. But I think the fact that he has a 7-year deal really suggests that he wants to be around for a long time. I also think that Marcus Freeman wants to be at Notre Dame for a while. I think he really loves the university and I think he embraces it. But let's be honest, he's an Ohio guy. He went to Ohio State, and I think that eventually Marcus Freeman is going to get Notre Dame back to being one of the top teams in college football. I really do. I know things have been a struggle a little bit as of late, but once he gets Notre Dame back to where we all want them to be and they're competing at the top of college football, every single school in the country is going to be calling for Marcus Freeman because they're going to see all the same things we see. They're going to see how charismatic he is. They're going to see how hard of a worker he is. And if that leads to success on the football field, other athletic directors are going to want him. They're going to want him representing their football program. And I think when that happens, it might be a little bit harder for him to stay at Notre Dame. And once Brian Kelly left for LSU and once Lincoln Riley left for USC, like those are 2 blue blood programs that they left for higher paying jobs. Like at that point, I don't think you can rule out anything when it comes to college football coaches and where they end up going. Like money talks, and we know that there's some other programs out there in the country that are willing to spend a little bit more on football. And hey, if one day they come calling for Marcus Freeman and he decides to leave, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying I wouldn't rule it out. So if I have to pick between Marcus Freeman and Micah Shrewsbury, who's going to be around longer, I think they're both going to have success. It might take Shrewsbury a little bit longer, but I think that he's going to be in it for the long haul. But it could be wrong. They could both end up being here for like the next decade or whatever. We're just going to have to wait and see. I think we're all going to hope that happens, right? Because if they're around for the next decade, that means both of them had a lot of success. And they are some really fun guys to root for. So I am really hoping that that ends up happening. All right, last question. We got more men's basketball talk. This one from @rfritz40. What are your thoughts on this freshman class and specifically Marcus Burton? Burton is awesome, okay? He balled out against Niagara, and I know it's Niagara, and it was Notre Dame's first game this season, but Burton set a school record for most points in their debut by a freshman. He was unbelievable in that game. He finished with 29, and he reminds me of Tyler Ulis, who is the little point guard on Kentucky. I think Ulis was actually a few inches smaller than Burton. He was like 5'8" or whatever, but he was a really, really good player and one of the best players on some really talented Kentucky teams. And Burton, as a freshman, man, he was unguardable at points in that game. And it's not, it's not like he's just pulling up from the outside. He only took 2 threes in the game and he made one. Like, his ability to drive to the lane and avoid the big guys that were around him was really impressive. He's so quick, he's so shifty, and he's going to be really fun to watch. The fact that he's a local kid too makes it all the more better. Went to Penn High School, Mr. Basketball in Indiana. Like, it is so great to see Mr. Basketball in Indiana stay in the state and go to Notre Dame as opposed to like Butler or IU or any of those other schools. So he's going to be really fun to root for. The fact that he's 5'11" makes me think that he's not going to be looking to bolt to the NBA as soon as possible. I think he's going to be around the program for a few years, and that would be great because he's going to be a really fun player to root for. But he wasn't the only freshman who played in that game. Kerry Booth was really good off the bench in his debut, 10 points, 9 rebounds in 21 minutes. He was the 55th ranked player in the class, and you saw why. Very athletic. He's definitely pretty raw, and he's going to have some things to like fine-tune as he gets older, but the future is really bright for him. Logan Imes, another freshman who saw a lot of action off the bench. He didn't put up any big numbers or anything, but he looked like he belonged out there, and I think with this Notre Dame roster and how many young guys are playing, like that's really all you can ask for out of some of these guys. Shrewsbury's kid, another freshman, he's got a good-looking jumper. I know he only went like 1 for 4 in that game, but I think he's going to figure out he's going to be a really good player. And it's really kind of wild seeing such a young Notre Dame men's basketball team because that's really not what we're accustomed to. We're more used to the Bray era when he'd only really play 6 guys, and they're all seniors, and you're hoping that they got pretty good as their time in college went on. But this season, it's probably not going to have a ton of wins. I don't know if they're going to get to double-digit wins this season, but it's going to be a lot of fun rooting for these guys, and I encourage everyone listening to this podcast to really invest in both the men's and the women's basketball programs because the women's team is really good. I think the men's team, this is more of a long-term investment because I think eventually Shrewsbury is going to figure everything out, and it's going to be really, really fun to watch. Like, I think he could take the program to heights we haven't seen since they went to the Elite Eight in back-to-back years under Mike Bray. But we have more men's basketball content on the show coming up here pretty soon. This is the last episode of this week, considering it's a bye week, and I'm getting this one out a little bit later on Thursday. But on Monday of next week, I got a special guest on, and we're going to do like a full-blown preview for the men's basketball team, even though the season already started. So we've got a lot of that coming your way, plus getting ready for the Wake Forest game, Senior Day, more football stuff coming out next week. So make sure that you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. And please give us a follow on Twitter/X at Locked On Irish. The Instagram account is at Locked On Irish Pod. My personal Twitter/X is at Tyler, WOJCIAK. Enjoy the weekend, everybody, and I will see you on Monday.